Our speakers today are Steve Lurch and Mike White. Steve is a research associate at Cornell University and works with Justine Van Heuvel, and previously worked with Bob Poole. Several of you may have heard of Bob. Steve has many years of experience working with grapes, and he is my go-to person when I need to know how to do something in the Northern Grapes Project research plots that I manage. He's just down the hall from me, and it's great. Mike is a viticulture specialist with Iowa State University Extension and is well known in Iowa and beyond for his great hands-on knowledge about grapes. Remember that as a participant in today's webinar, you will not have the ability to speak. If you have a microphone, please keep it muted. If you are having any technical difficulties, please type a note in the chat pod over on the bottom right side of your screen, and I'll do what I can to help. If you have questions, please type those in the chat pod as well. We're going to take a break during the course of the webinar to address some questions, and then we'll have some time at the end as well. So Steve, turn everything over to you.
Okay, Chrislyn, you can hear me fine, I take it?
Just fine.
All right, good. Well, then I'll start. Folks, I don't know or I have no idea how experienced any of you people are. I'm sure we've got well-experienced people and some newcomers. So this is going to be a fairly basic presentation. I'm going to be doing it fairly quickly, so there'll probably be questions. But also, this is my first webinar, so I'll probably make some mistakes. So if you will forgive me for that, we'll get going. The real basics of trellis construction. There's some questions that you need to ask yourself, before you start doing that. Are you going to install it before or after the plants? Are you going to have irrigation in your vineyard? Do you have drain tile? What kind of wire positioning and end assemblies? Those kind of questions, and we'll be addressing those as we go along in the presentation. But one of the basic thing to start out with is that you really want to use high quality materials as much as possible. It's much easier to do a good job building a trellis than it is to spend a lot of time repairing it. It's the same thing, posts, both the line posts and the end posts, they need to be in deep enough, they need to be tall enough for your trellis, and you really need to have the right equipment for the installation before you get started. So those are things to just kind of bear in mind. And there we go, it advanced. All right, first thing, there's a lot of different training systems. We've got, low cane. Can everybody see the white arrow on the screen? Chrislyn, you can see it, right?
No, I can't see the white arrow. Try using the...
Well, I was trying to turn that on, and it did not want to turn on.
Okay. So hang on.
Yeah. So anyway, folks, what we have, there are really kind of two common low VSP systems, low cane and low cordon. There's two pictures of leafless cordon vines, if you're not familiar with that. I'm gonna advance my slide, maybe. Yeah. We're having a little bit of trouble, folks. So we're gonna mute for just a second. All right, folks, hopefully we've got that all fixed. You should be able to see a red laser dot on the screen. So I'm going to be pointing to some stuff. I mentioned that a couple of low VSP systems and divided canopy systems. There's the Lyre. I'm pointing to it right now. Geneva double curtain, which is, essentially it's a high cordon version of a divided canopy. The Lyre is a low cordon version of the divided canopy. Smart Dyson is vertically divided. It has an up and a down canopy. And high wire systems. There's high wire cordon that I'm pointing to right now. There's the umbrella Niffin training system and the forearm Niffin training system. So Those are all fairly common systems. You may or may not be familiar with them. However, they all have elements in common. They've all got posts, they've all got wires, and they've all got anchor or bracing systems of some kind. So as far as posts are concerned, what I typically try to advise people to drive posts instead of setting them into augured holes. You get a much firmer post that way, and especially with augured holes, one of the things that happens with augured holes is there's usually loose dirt in the bottom. When you set the post in, that loose dirt settles, and you can get some varying heights. Typically, we use 3 to 4 inch, 8-foot pressure-treated yellow pine and lodgepole pine here in the Finger Lakes. That's the most common post that you see. Line posts, you really want to have them a good 2 feet into the ground, and of course the remainder will be above ground. In Finger Lakes, our standard spacing is 24 feet between posts. There's a lot of, people very often choose spacings, to give a 24-foot between post spacing. We usually don't recommend that you go much over that. It's perfectly all right to go closer, especially if you've got heavy crops. All your posts really need to be the same height. You have to consider the clearance by your hedging equipment and your harvester, so if you're going to mechanically harvest. End posts, I like to have them a minimum of 5 to 6 inch diameter posts, 8 foot long, and as close to 3 foot deep as you can get them. Many growers in the Finger Lakes have a slight, the top of their end post is only about 5 feet off the ground to kind of facilitate getting the mechanical harvester started down the row. So having the end post a little bit lower is fairly common. I like to have my end post angled out toward the outside of the vineyard, up to perhaps a 60-degree angle. There we go. Here's a picture of an image of someone augering in end post holes. Again, I just as soon drive them if I could. And of course, that inset is one of the anchoring systems that I kind of like. So our next image here is manual post pounding with steel posts. I don't know how many of you people have done that. I suspect that what the gentleman is doing on the pallet is probably not OSHA approved, but such things happen. Here are some images of a couple of different steel post designs. The one that I'm pointing to right now actually has slots preformed in it to hold wire. And in the preceding image, this inset here is a driving tool that is put in the end of that post to facilitate driving it. This is a heavy-duty U-channel post, and the lower image is just a standard studded T-post that I'm sure many of you people are familiar with. All right, my image is not what it's supposed to be on this one. Oh. This slide says, can exclusive use of steel posts be a problem? And I'm just going to advance to see. There we go. I thought that would happen. I borrowed this slide from somebody and wasn't too familiar with it. Yes, it can. I don't know exactly where this image was taken. Tim might know, but it's a situation where a fairly long run of steel posts, they had a severe wind gust, and it laid down a number of rows, right? Just blew them over. Many people who use steel posts kind of advocate having a wooden post every 3 posts or 5 posts or something like that. Anchor systems. With anchor systems, there's a number of different anchoring options. One of them, I believe most of you people have seen the screw-in anchors. Typically, we screw them in straight down with either an auger. It could be a bobcat-mounted hydraulic drive or a 3-point hitch post hole digger with a auger with a anchor driver on it, or even just a steel bar through the eye of the screw-in anchor. I have participated in burying anchors, and that doesn't really work as well. You always want to have your anchors as deep as you can. The buried anchors in an augered out hole, it takes quite a while for the ground to reset and give you a good anchor point. Anchor wires, sometimes some people might use say a piece of white PVC tube on that anchor wire just so that you can see it. That's one of the problems with the screw-in anchors. The wire that goes down to the anchor sometimes gets damaged by being driven over because it's really kind of hard to see. I prefer the pounded wooden post anchors. I'd like to have a minimum of 5 to 6 inch diameter post, 7 feet long, and have a good 4 foot of it in the ground. The extra 3 feet is very, very useful because it actually gives your tractor operators something visible to see, and they're much less likely to either break the anchor or damage the tractor tire. But the pounded post anchors, you really have to pound those. Augering a hole and just setting them in a hole, they just don't hold in that kind of system. There's also a duckbill type of anchor that's driven in the ground with a special tool. I've got a couple of images of those. Here are different earth anchors. I'm pointing right now to the screw-in anchors. There's several different styles there. I'm now pointing to one style of duckbill anchor and a different style. And these are driven with a bar, so they're driven down, and when the cable is pulled, that duckbill will rotate and grab into the earth. I've never actually used those, so I don't have any real opinion about them. On wires, our standard, again, here in the Finger Lakes is a 12.5 gauge high tensile wire that I'm sure most of you people are pretty familiar with. One of the things you need to remember about it, when the wire is packaged at the source, it's packed and it's wound under tension. So you really have to be aware of that and keep it under control. If you just cut everything loose without being aware of it, you can have the wire just kind of unwind very rapidly, and it can be a little bit dangerous. So that's something to keep in mind. We usually use a spinning jenny of some kind to apply the wire. With wires, you want to splice it correctly. I typically use a compression type sleeve. There are other systems, but with the high tensile wire, the compression type sleeves work the best. You want to leave enough length at the ends of the rows to work with. I've had a number of occasions when either myself or someone working with me, we'd run wire out the length of the row, cut it off, and find out that it was a foot too short. So it's really amazing how much extra wire it takes to go up 3 feet or 5 foot up on a post. So that's one of the things that you want to be aware of with that. The end tie-offs, like I said, I usually use compression sleeves either to splice wire or to fasten it around a post. Many people use gripples. I don't know how many of you folks are familiar with that, but I've got some images of some of these things. There is a wire gripper that functions similar to a gripple that goes through a hole in the post. And some people will even wrap the high tensile wire twice around the post and bend it back around the wire and just staple that right back to the post. So strainers are really only needed on the wire that's carrying the fruit loads. Usually we use some less expensive system to hold other wires. Yeah, there we go. With wire, we usually staple the wire to the wood posts. I like to use a 1 3/4 inch length staple minimum. Shorter staples tend to pull out way too frequently. You also want to be careful that you don't drive the staples too tight against the wire. Otherwise, your wire, it's very difficult for you to tension the wire. It won't slide. I also, especially in high wire systems, I like to put my top wire right on top of the posts. That can be a problem if you have to go through your vineyard periodically to redrive posts. But really what that's telling you is that your soil type is not very good for your system. I've very often solved frost heaving of posts simply by driving the post in another 6 inches. That very often cures that problem. With steel posts, there are proprietary fasteners for different steel posts. They're pre-bent wires clips that perhaps you've seen used for studded T-posts. And again, some of the posts, like the one I showed, have preformed wire slots. Catch wires. I don't know how many of you folks are doing vertical chute positioned canopy management, but catch wires around here in the Finger Lakes, a lot of people are using 14 gauge instead of 12.5 gauge for economic reasons. If you're using movable catch wires, the fastening the ends are always a problem. You can see this image of an end post with pieces of chain that are fastened to the ends of the wires. That system works, but it can be kind of fraught with problems. Very often the hook or nail that people use to hook it to will bend. You catch on tractor tires. I generally fasten both wires to a wire strainer and use the wire strainer to tension them. There's probably a lot of other systems that people have tried, but again, they can be a little bit of a problem. With fixed wires, fixed catch wires, they can be a lot more time consuming to manage because you actually have to tuck chutes up in between the wires, and you can also get a lot of chute damage from that. There's 3 different images of spinning jennies. The one I'm pointing to right now is homemade. These are several different wire gripping tools. This is a Klein gripper, and it just clamps onto the wire, and you pull on the loop on the end. Here's another version, and this is a chain type wire puller. There's quite a lot of different tools. This is what the crimping sleeves look like, and this is a crimping tool that you use to compress those sleeves. Wire gripping devices. That's a gripple. For those of you who don't know what they are, this is a wire gripper. This is the type that goes through the hole drilled in the fence. The wire's pulled through it. It works like a Chinese finger trap. And this, of course, is a tool that is used to tighten wires with either the gripple or this wire gripper. Wire strainers, 2 different types. This is an inline strainer with a tool that tensions it. This is an online strainer that just sets over a wire and is tightened with this tool. Bracing systems. This is the top picture here is an angled brace. The one I'm pointing to right now is an H brace, and this is a dead man brace. Angled end post. Like I said, I like to lean them at a 60-degree angle. There's an image with a screw-in anchor. This kind of divides the force so that you have some upward tension on the anchor and some horizontal. It splits it about in half by doing that. This is an end post, driven end post. Again, this one is cut off short. Mine would be several feet out of the ground. One of the things that you don't want to do with the angled end post is to have the anchor too close to the end post. Now, this is an apple tree system, but if it's too close, you have a tendency to just pull that anchor post right up out of the ground. Here's another image of an angled end with screw-in anchor. A picture in the field. This is actually a cable system from Gripple. So the wire is looped around, goes through the anchor and up to the top, and it's tightened with a Gripple. H-brace, this is before the diagonal twitch wire was put on, but this is a good height. I like to have my horizontal in an H-brace system about half of the length. So if this is an 8-foot post, I want to have that only about 4 foot or less up above the ground. Otherwise, it tends to lift the interior anchor post out of the ground. Again, this is what not to do. You can see that with the wire at too steep an angle, it has a tendency to lift this end post right up out of the ground. So, you know, like I said, I'd stretch that out much farther if I could. This is an angled brace. Probably people have seen these things. One of the things that can happen with the angled brace, let me back up. One of the things that will happen with some of these angled braces, if it's too steep an angle, again, it jacks that end post right out of the ground. So you want to have the length, you know, twice the height of it. The best way for these angled bases to work is to actually have some kind of stop on the ground that the angle post goes to, and then a wire or a piece of 2x4 that goes from where I'm pointing on that angled brace back to this post that holds it so that nothing is driven into the ground. It just acts like a foot. And I believe this is my last slide, when I'm doing a 3-wire system, this is pretty much the way my systems look. I use my wire goes past the end post right down to my anchor post, and I'll put a strainer in if this is a low wire system, I'll put the strainer in this wire. If it's a high wire, a high cordon, I'd put the strainer here, and I'd probably use gripples or some other system right here. So I believe I'm done.
Yes.
All right.
All right. I have a couple questions for you.
Okay.
David asked, does the type of post-treatment affect the grapevine?
Not to the best of my knowledge. I've never heard of any real research done with that. I know there have been concerns about the CCA treated posts. One of the things that one of the things that's been pointed out to me is that if the treatment leaches out of the post quickly, your post rots. So the treatment kind of tends to stay in the post or right in that general area. So I've never heard of any problems at all with it affecting grapevines.
Okay. And then Bob asked, with an angled brace, do you still suggest a 60-degree angle for the end post?
No, actually I don't. That's a very, very good point. With the angled brace, you may want it to be angled out slightly, but you know, vertical is fine. This angled brace works. I've heard of people I was first introduced to it by someone who had to deal with very rocky, shallow soil, and he was having a hard time getting any kind of anchor into the ground. So, and he claims that worked quite well for that.
Okay. And then Sean asked if you have any experience with the microfilament or poly wires.
Oh, yes, the monofilament. It has its positives and it has its weaknesses, and it's one of the positive attributes of the monofilament wire is that it's very easy to stretch. I've used it in several different applications. I kind of like it for very, very short runs for catch wires, you know, because you can stretch it and stretch it. It's really good for that. It's one of the disadvantages is that it stretches well. Yeah, so if you've got a long run, you may stretch 20 feet, 30 feet of monofilament out before you actually get it tight enough. The most serious drawback is that it's very, very easy to cut. So you have to be very, very aware of where your pruning shears are when you're pruning.
I would be a disaster in that type of a situation.
Yeah.
Or picking. I'd probably cut it when I'm picking, too.
Yeah, and I've spent a lot of time repairing it when I've used it after picking has taken place.
Yeah. Okay, Jack asked, how long can you expect treated pine posts to last in the ground?
Oh, here at the experiment station, we reuse posts. The CCA treated posts, you know, the treated yellow pine, if you get a good quality post, 3-4 inch post, they'll probably last 25 to 30 years. That's just my guess. You certainly can expect a 20-year lifespan out of them, I think.
Okay, and then Dennis asked, the only thing he said was train vine on wood post. So I'm not, do you know what he means by that?
Probably the head train system. I don't know where Dennis is. I don't have any personal experience with that. The standard old-time system, it was established before we actually had wire, was a 4-foot tall, 4 foot out of the ground stake that a vine was tied up to. That's a system that would work, but pretty much the industry has gone over to a wire, unless he's asking about individual temporary stakes for vines.
Dennis, do you want to elaborate on what you meant? Anyway, let's kind of table that, and then we'll move on. Vanessa asked if there are any thoughts on extending current post heights.
I have not done it. My recommendation is to plan your trellis well. The few times I've been involved in trying to extend trellises, there are some trellis post extensions that are manufactured, steel ones, that I assume work reasonably well. I haven't used them very often, but it's a lot of work to go back in, even if with a good extension system, to go in and add height to the post.
Okay. All right. Well, one more question from Tim. He asks, and then we'll move on. So he asks, are there any special tips for cross arms in Geneva double curtain systems?
Oh, God. No, not right now. I don't know if those manufactured cross arms that we bought many, many years ago are still available. They're a very good cross arm system. If I were going to make a GDC system, I would probably use a pressure treated 2x4 bolted to the top of the post with 1 or 2 diagonal braces to hold them up. If I was only going to use 1 diagonal brace, I'd alternate, say 1 to the west and the next one to the right, but 2 diagonal braces up to the horizontal would probably work the best.
Okay, so let's just go ahead. A couple other questions came in, and I have those recorded. They're here. They're ready to go. But I want to go ahead and switch over to Mike's talk. So let me do that.
Okay.
And then I can thank you, Steve, for your presentation.
Well, thank you.
So, okay, Mike, I think you should be ready to go now.
And can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you just fine.
Good. I hope everybody else can hear me too. I'm going to be talking about just pruning fundamentals, and I'm really not going to be telling you how to prune, but some of the things you got to get in order before you prune. For me, and I'll be honest with you, when I first got into this, working with grapevines back around 2000, it took me about 4 years to be completely comfortable of walking into about any vineyard and talking about pruning. And once you have to really know the morphology of the plant, the physiology, it just took a long time before I could really be comfortable in how to prune. And I'm just going to kind of go over the fundamentals here. My voice is a little crackly here. We practiced last week with Chrislyn, and I think I got her cold. From
New York to Iowa, huh?
That's how viruses work. They go right through the USB. And I must have got it or something. But so I'm heavily medicated, as is Chrislyn's, and we'll go through this here. When you talk about pruning, the 3 main things we're trying to do is regulate the crop size. Also, we're trying to balance that crop so that we don't have too much vegetation or too much crop, so that the vine will live healthy for numerous years. And overall, maintain that vine size so that it fits the trellis system that we have. So let's start forward here, and I'll hit that button. So the first thing you want to know is you need to know the vine. And, what is a persistent lateral? Well, if you have a persistent lateral, that meant it hung on through the winter. And did you know that bud that's in the axle or the armpit of that persistent lateral it's not fruitful. So if you're going to keep a persistent lateral, and as a count bud, you need to take the next bud up. But usually that persistent laterals, the buds on the persistent laterals are very cold hardy, and they got through the winter pretty good. And sometimes under droughty conditions and that, we need those persistent laterals to maintain a crop load for the coming year, and we keep those on after pruning. But you need to know that area as far as all the parts of the vine and what you're doing out there. Also, things like, one of the biggest questions I get in the spring is, oh, I can't go prune now because the sap is coming out. Well, that's a protective measure of that vine. That's the physiology of the vine. It pushes bad organisms out. It's just like when you cut yourself, it's you're pushing bad organisms out of the vine. That's a protective measure of that vine. So I don't really get excited when people talk about the sap flowing, out of the vine. Okay, next slide here. You need to know the cultivar. I think that's probably one of the most important things you need to know. You don't want to go into a vineyard with 4 or 5 varieties or cultivars and prune them all the same. You need to know that cultivar, and probably one of the best things you can do prior to pruning is read up all you can about that cultivar. And quite frankly, you probably should have done that prior to planting the vineyard. That didn't always happen in all cases. But like cold tolerance, it's the least tolerant vines you prune last. The most tolerant vines you can prune early. Also, on the least tolerant vines, you maybe leave a few extra buds for insurance purposes in case you did get a cold injury. Percent of fruitfulness on secondary buds, example like lacrosse out here, we can get about 70% crop on secondary buds, so maybe you can prune lacrosse and not worry about double pruning or leaving a lot of extra buds, knowing that lacrosse can easily compensate. And there's other cultivars that will do that too. Know your average cluster size. It's like Norton, these little small clusters, or Petite Pearl, Valvin Muscat, Liamio. You're going to need more buds to produce a decent crop out there. So make sure that you leave the buds relative to the cluster size, of that plant. Fruitful baseball buds, there's a number of varieties, like maybe a St. Croix, Esprit, and they're very fruitful baseball buds that'll come out in many cases. So you can be maybe more vigorous in the pruning procedure. The vigor, you prune the vine to match the trellis system, and you need to know the vigor of that plant. Maybe it needs to be on a GDC and not on just a single high wire, or maybe you need to move it off that DSP and put it up to a single high wire. Early or late bud break, that's very important because, the end buds, the distal buds will often break 2, 3, maybe 4 days earlier than the lower buds. So in the pruning procedure in the spring, we typically prune the late bud break varieties early, and then the early bud break varieties later. Then you need to know you're pruning to match the trellis system that you want. You need to know what kind of cultivar, what system does it work best in your area, your site. The first couple years, all you're doing is trying to build root systems and also trying to get it up to the wire. So that first year, the pruning is pretty easy. I've actually told people after they plant their grapes, just run over them with a lawnmower, and they just stare at me. But all you need is 2 or 3 buds at the most down there. And then what you're going to do is, depending on whether you want a single trunk or multiple trunks, you're going to get those trunks to the wire the first year. And then the second year, you're going to try to develop a cordon system on that wire. But the first 2 years, it's all about building the structure of the vine to the wire, and also building the root system down below, and you keep all the fruit off those first couple of years. Know the reasons behind single trunk versus double trunk, and this is a controversy that comes up quite often. I remember when John Marshall in Minnesota, and Notes of the North, the Minnesota Grape Growers newsletter, he came out with an article about he was in favor of single trunks versus the double trunk for numerous reasons. And then he had Richard Thomas at Santa Rosa Junior College kind of back him up on this. And, it was a big article in the newsletter, and I think people argue about that newsletter for about a year or two afterwards. But John Marshall, and I kind of agree with him, if you have with a single trunk system, it seems like that single trunk is more vigorous than if you have double trunks. You always with a double trunk system, you have one trunk seems to be more vigorous than the other. Also, with you're going to have more even ripening with a single trunk versus two trunks. Easier to prune, especially if you have people that really don't know what they're doing out there, don't quite have all the techniques of pruning. It's a lot easier to prune a single trunk system, because whenever you look at a double or multiple trunk system, how many buds do I leave on this side versus the weak side over here? And you got to think out every vine, and it adds more time out there when you're pruning. So it's less management time. Now, with single trunks, where do we recommend that? That's in cases where you have a very cold tolerant cultivar, and also in the case where you don't have a lot of crown gall problems. The single trunk is probably the best way to go. Now, what the advantages of the double trunk? It's hard to argue. You can use a double trunk with everything if you want to, but it is insurance from winter kill. Normally, the younger trunk. There's usually, when you have a serious winter kill problem out there and you have double trunks, normally it's the case. One trunk will survive. It's often the younger trunk will survive. So you've got something out there to produce fruit, to give some vine balance and hold back that vine vigor. So that's a benefit. Also, crown gall is becoming such a concern out here in the Midwest, and with winter energy injuries from last year that we've seen, crown gall is getting to be a serious problem. And if you have a crown gall problem in your vineyard, it's probably a good idea to consider a double trunk, and that's going to give you more management options in the future, because with crown gall usually will knock out one trunk versus the other. But it takes more management time. Okay. Now, let's see. I got to go one more. Here we go. And I think as far as you want to know the balanced pruning concept, the balanced pruning concept, that was first developed, Michigan, like 1925, somewhere in there. And then Cornell jumped in there, and then in the 60s and 70s really put a lot of research in the balanced pruning concept, primarily on the table grapes and that. And there's a lot of reason behind balanced pruning. If you go straight balanced pruning concept on our hybrids, what happens is, because the first bud is often fruitful on hybrids, you go completely balanced pruning, you'll end up with more count buds than you probably originally wanted. But it's a good place to start. With balanced pruning concept, you go out there and you want to go out to a couple vines and do a normal pruning, what you think is correct. Go ahead and weigh those prunings, and for every pound, you're going to have a formula how many buds to keep, typically up to a maximum of about 60. Again, each cultivar will have somewhat different pruning formula when you go different as far as the number of buds to keep. Example, Concord, Niagara, Catawba, it's usually 30 plus 10. So the first pound of prunings, you're going to have 30 buds, and then each pound afterwards, you're going to add another 10 up to a maximum of 60. You can get and it varies, like, maybe 20 plus 10 for Sabal, maybe 25 plus 10 for Frontenac. The Crescent, again, is back to 30 plus 10, but it varies by cultivar, and it has to do with the bigger the vine and how fruitfulness the buds are. People say, well, I'm not going to go out and measure each vine. You don't have to. you can go out and you can prune a couple of vines, and just go ahead and weigh that with a fish scale or whatever. And believe me, after you weigh a couple, 2 or 3 vines, you're going to be able to walk up to a vine and guesstimate pretty darn close how many pounds of pruning are on that vine and how many buds you want to leave behind. If you want to look at a good video or look at a video, I put a video together. It's the URL there if you want to go there on the balanced pruning concept and how it works if you want to go there. Okay. Now, double pruning. Double pruning or long pruning, I often call it insurance pruning. And this is a controversial subject for some people because they don't want to. It seems like a lot of people, they just want to get her done. I understand that. It's like painting the house. You don't want to go back and paint it twice. You just want to get to the vineyard, get everything done. But as far as insurance-wise, it's a good procedure to use. And time-wise, I think maybe you can work it to your advantage. If you go through knowing that the buds you leave, those distal buds will break 2 or 3 days earlier and give you some insurance out there, you can send people out there to prune and early in the season, let's say in January, February, and tell them, hey, prune everything within a foot of the cordon or whatever, and get 90% of that stuff out of there. And you can get that out of there. Then you can have people that know how to prune come back later on, maybe right after buds swell, and you can clean up that remaining 10%. Yeah, the swell buds, or if you knock them off, they're easy to knock off. But, to me, this is a pretty easy way to work with varieties that tend to break bud early, where you got the frost injury problems. I just think it's something you really want to look at to leave more buds when you go in there and prune, so that you can come back and analyze where you're at in the vineyard, right at bud swell, to see what kind of survivability you have, and then prune it back to the exact number of buds that you want. But again, this is kind of a controversial issue, and every time I bring it up at a pruning day or something like that, there's a lot of people that don't agree with that. And I understand you want to get it done, and maybe one time through. I do have a video that you can go to and where you can see the difference between long and short prune system, and then the reasons behind it there, the URL. Okay. Well, I'm hitting the button. There we go. There's a lot of books out there on pruning that you can go through, and then there's some basic concepts of pruning that you need to learn. But know the optimum characteristics of the vine. Where you can walk up to a vine and say, hey, maybe this vine has been overcropped. We had a drought last season. You can look at the characteristics of the vine and somewhat give you an idea how you want to prune it. Example, pruning weights, ideally maybe 0.2 to 0.4 pounds per foot of cordon. It varies between the hybrids and the table grapes, but the more vigorous vine will have the higher pounds per foot of cordon. You look at the internode lengths out there when you're pruning. If you got good internode lengths, you got good vine balance, go ahead and prune the way you've been pruning. If there's really short internode lengths, maybe you need to prune a little different. But know those characteristics of the vine, those optimum characteristics that you want to get to, so that you have a well-balanced vine that produce quality fruit. Also, again, we talked about single trunks versus double trunks and where do you want to use them. Probably the number one rule of thumb that most people use when pruning is somewhere between 4 to 6 buds per shoot, or 4 to 6 buds per foot of row of cordon. So that if you got a single wire system, you maybe averaging 5 buds per foot. GDC, you might be somewhere between 8 to 12 buds per foot, and that will give you a higher yield out there. But know those characteristics. If you want to learn about all those characteristics, I do have a crop management concept paper online at this site. Just go in there and pull that up, and it goes through all these optimum vine characteristics that are pulled from multiple sources that you can use and get an idea what you're going for out there. YouTube videos. I can't tell you the time I spend on YouTube videos watching different things about vineyards. One of them, there's a lot of YouTube videos on pruning. I have several of them out there, one on pruning tools, pruning different vines. We've went through a couple of them already. Also have a pre-pruner video of mechanical pruning going on out there. But again, you know, go into YouTube, put in grapevine pruning or whatever, and there's a lot of videos you can watch, both from private sources and university sources, to give you an idea. And often they're related to cultivar. You can pull up ones on certain cultivars that you have in your vineyard to get an idea where you want to be. Know your tools. I also have a video out there on the different pruning tools. You know, ergonomic gloves, something that, you know, so you don't get those repetitive injury syndrome to your hands and fingers, but, you know, tight gloves so you're pruning out there. 10% bleach solution, and that's, to me, that's the only time I would use a 10% bleach solution is to clean off my tools before I go into somebody's vineyard, and also have it available so that if I hit a plant that has crown gall, I can shoot my tools, my pruning tools, with that bleach solution before I go on to the next plant. Just, I don't know, mentally it makes me feel better. It does sterilize the tool for you. But again, when I see crown gall, it's a good idea. I go ahead and squirt my pruning tools with that 10% bleach solution. Flagging is always a good idea to have that in your pocket or your bucket of tools, because you're going to have vines out there that are dead or dying. There's something wrong with them. They may have crown gall. Go ahead and mark those vines so you can come back after pruning and manage those vines and deal with those vines once you find them out there. Have some bypass pruners instead of the handle pruners and keep them sharp. Bypass pruners are easier to use. And then have some loppers out there to cut some bigger stuff, because, you know, there's going to be times you're going to have to cut the entire trunk off or one of the trunks, and loppers is what you're going to need to do this with. Keep everything sharp so it's less stress on your hand when you're sharpening. And here's one thing that a lot of people don't do, but the more I prune, the more I realize eye protection is pretty important. You're out there and some of these real vigorous vines jump into and start pruning, start pulling these vines apart, and yeah, it's a good idea to have something covering, protecting your eye out there so you're not poking yourself in the eye. Sun protection when you're out there working, and ties. There's all kinds of ties out there. I kind of like to use the natural sisal tie. A lot of people use rubber bands. And then I put everything in a tool carrier. It's just a bucket tool carrier when I'm out there in the vineyard. But know what kind of tools you need so you're not running back and forth into the house or the barn, and so that you can stay out there and get things done. And again, I have a video there that you can look at, and I just go over the tools that I use when I'm out there pruning. Study up. Every year in my newsletter, if you're not signed up for my newsletter, just send me an email, and I'll sign you up with a newsletter. It's weekly in season. This time of year it comes out every other year, but every spring I come out with an issue with a bunch of resources for great pruning, and you know, as far as things to read or PowerPoint presentation, and also videos. And if you see here, the one that issue number 263 that I sent out last year had, and it's still online, 27 great pruning resources and 27 great different videos you can watch too. But every year I update that, and you can go there and look at those. Somebody's got a question here, and I'm kind of ignoring the question so I can get to the slides. But what kind of ties do I use? I use the sisal, the natural sisal twines is what I use, and cut them up about 16-inch lengths for tying. Really cheap to use. They natural biodegradable out in the vineyard. I don't like the plastic twine because it stays out there forever. It gets caught in your mower. and also the vine will grow into it. It doesn't degrade, and often it'll girdle the vine when you're out there. So again, I use natural sizable twine. I do not use the plastic twine. Okay, so that's it. I'm open for questions, and Kristlyn, are you going to take over now?
Not entirely, no. I am going to go ahead and switch myself back to presenter, and I'm going to throw up the remaining webinar schedule for everybody. Well, you know what, let's leave it back on your slides because you might need to go back to stuff as you're answering questions. Yeah. So let me make you presenter again. Okay, so let's see here. We have some questions. Someone asked for the link to the slides, so I'm going to post that really quick. So that address I just posted in the chat pod is how you can get a copy of the slides from today's presentations. Also, this is being recorded and it will be posted on our website. It may take me a few days, but it will eventually be up there. It's on the recorded webinars page of the Northern Grapes Project website. So, questions that came in. Evelyn asked if there's any information sorry, about the fruitfulness of secondary and basal buds available anywhere, or, you know, that she could get.
Yeah, I've never seen any document that'll go through all the different cultivars and give you an idea of how fruitful the secondary buds are. It's something, you know what? It's just something you got to Google, look at each cultivar, and you're going to find something if you do enough research on each cultivar to give you an idea how fruitful those secondary buds will be. Not always, but often you can find that.
And I would kind of wonder if it somewhat depends on your location too, just how fruitful the secondaries are.
Yeah, I don't know about that, but I just know that different cultivars tend to have different levels of fruitfulness on their secondary buds.
Okay, and then Kevin asked, so apparently at one point you mentioned crown gall, and he said, so if we see it, should we cut it out under the gall if we have replacement stems started, or plan for it by establishing a replacement?
If you have just a single trunk system, you're probably going to just leave that gall on there, and you're going to want to bring another sucker up or two. Probably two. You want to develop a two-trunk system there. Because you're going to want to, that gall probably will not kill the plant that year. So you're going to be able to produce a crop on that plant, but you're going to want to develop new suckers up for replacement trunks. Now, if you have a double trunk system, then if the gall is just on one, you just cut the entire thing off.
Okay.
I hate cutting off the below the gall where you just have a stub there on the ground, because then you just got a vigorous mess to deal with.
Okay. Jack asked, what about the pounds of wood you cut off when you're hedging? How does this affect the weight when you're winter pruning? I guess that's to figure out how to like if you're doing the balanced pruning system.
Yeah, that's a really good question. You know, it's how much did you hedge? That's something you're going to have to put in the back of your mind when you're out there and you're pruning. You know, and maybe add another pound. Say, well, I must have taken off another pound for hedging of that. That's something you're going to have to just, well, I guess you could weigh it when you're doing the hedging, or just put a guesstimate in there to additional, you know, as far as when you're doing your balanced pruning. You know, I go back to hedging is that often we do hedging because we have too much vigor, and maybe one way to get by all that hedging is figure out why we have too much vigor.
Okay. Vanessa asked, if you do a major cut, are you supposed to treat the cut at all?
I don't think so. You know, if you had U-type of disease out there, maybe if, you know, trunk disease is a problem. I don't think it. I'd let the trunk go ahead and bleed out and then dry up. That's what I would do. Unless there's some specific disease or a reason why, I guess a disease potential out there, I don't think I would be treating them, no.
Okay. Bob asked, for the first year, you mentioned pruning fruit.
Yeah, the first couple years you take the fruit off, and because all you're doing, your number one goal there is you want to build a root system. And you build that root system. Instead of putting the nutrients into the fruit, it goes into the root. And by year 3, it doesn't always work that way. Sometimes it's year 4, depending on the seasons and how you manage the vine. But in an ideal world, by year 3, you want to start producing a crop. That may be maybe a third of a crop. By year 4, you might be at 2/3 of a crop. By year 5, maybe a full crop. That would be in a perfect world. But yeah, first 2 years, you take off all the fruit.
Okay. Tim asked you if anyone in Iowa is using cane pruning training systems, and if so, what their experience has been.
Oh, very few. We have some table grape growers using it, some hobby people doing it. One of the drawbacks, it tends to take more labor to do cane pruning. Anytime I work with an organic grower that's trying to go organic or is organic, I do recommend cane pruning, because with cordon system and those old arms out there on the cordon, there's a lot more source of inoculum for diseases. So there tends to be a less disease potential starting early in the season with the cane prune system. So, here in Iowa, I would say maybe 5% of the people are using cane prune. But again, if they're organic, I normally recommend cane pruning.
Okay. Steve Lurch, do you want to turn your microphone back on? We had some leftover questions and some other ones come back.
Okay.
One thing Jack asked is, why would you not start with 10-footers with 3 feet of the post up and 7 feet down?
I have no objection to that at all. The last time I bought posts, a 10-foot post was almost twice the price of an 8-foot post.
Wow,
if you've got a lot of vigor, and I really didn't mention that, if you do have a lot of vigor to manage and you want a higher canopy, especially with the vertically divided systems like Scott Henry or Smart Dyson, you probably do want a little bit higher canopy, and 10-foot posts, 3 feet in the ground, 7 out, is a great option. The thing you have to watch out for is, can you get your equipment over it?
Okay, and I forgot to thank Mike, by the way, for his excellent presentation. Another question came in and asked, what is the best distance for parallel wires on a steel T-post system?
Yes, I saw that question, and I'm a little bit unclear about that. My last slide shows spacing of 30 inches to the bottom wire, and then 20 inches and 20 inches. I kind of like that system. If you're doing a 3-wire system, that's what I do. If you're doing a low train system with vertical chute positioning, what you want to be aware that your bottom wire needs to be high enough so that you can comfortably work on it. And 30 inches from the ground is pretty much the lowest anybody actually wants to work with.
Okay.
So, and I also noticed there was a question about wire tension.
Okay.
And so I'd like to address that, because the question was, how much tension should you put on the wire? I never measure the tension, but typically what I do is I'll tension my crop wires so that with a moderate amount of pulling, let's say with 30 or 40 pounds of force, you'll deflect the wire, say, less than 4 inches. That's a pretty good tension. You reach a point of diminishing returns with wire tensioning. If you can over-tension them and run the risk of pulling your posts out of the ground without really gaining much at all in supporting your crop. So you do want to, more is not better when it comes to tensioning. You just want them tight enough so that your wires don't sag more than, say, 4 or 5 inches between posts.
Okay. This question might also be something Mike could answer. Peter asks if you've ever heard of a product called Rot Block to protect wooden posts.
And I haven't.
Mike, have you ever heard of it?
No, I guess my answer to that would be if you're using CCA posts, you should be able to just, like ideally you'd like 0.40 CCA treatment. That's 0.40 pounds per cubic foot of wood for dry land conditions, and then 0.60 CCA treatment for wetland conditions, wetter ground. I don't know why you'd want. They're going to last 20, 25 years or plus if you buy the correct post, but I'm not aware of that stuff. If it was really cheap, maybe it's something that's worthwhile.
Okay. A question just came in. Can we hand tension, attach our wires to the end post, then put ratchet attached to duckbill anchor to tension both wires?
Yeah, I'm looking at that question right now. I think tension our wires to the Kevin, could you just type in a clarification? Is that about catch wires or cropping wires, or which wires are you talking about?
Okay. And then we finally had a clarification about the distance for parallel wires. Okay. About basically, is it what's your optimum spacing for catch wires used on VSP, and how many should you have?
I like 2 pairs of catch wires. I like to put the bottom pair about the center of the fruiting zone of the system. If it's a low cordon VSP, I'd have them probably about 8 inches, probably not much more than 8 inches higher than the support wire. And then I typically leave that catch wire in place. The closer together your catch wires are, the catch wire clips are in a movable system, the better off you are. But it's more expensive, more work. I kind of like to have them 8 to 10 inches apart, and just move the top pair of catch wires up as the season progresses.
Okay, I think that actually all the questions have been answered.
Okay.
By either us or some of our people in the chat pod who are participating in the webinar. So that's great, guys. This is a lot of fun, and we really like to see our chat pod. So there's some disagreement about. So Mike says that basically in the wintertime you should reduce the tension in your fruiting wires to avoid tension, to avoid them snapping.
And that's a perfectly good technique. For us here in the Finger Lakes, it usually doesn't get cold enough to really bother.
Yeah, we have some vineyards out here that the wire gets so tight that it's almost like guitar strings, and they'll actually pull out the end posts.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I just like to not have a huge amount of tension on them. The least amount of tension I can get on them, the better.
Yeah. All right. Well, with that, I think we had probably better stop because we're a tiny bit over time. I want to wrap up by posting a link to our post-webinar survey. We really, really do appreciate all the feedback we get from these surveys, especially some of the requests that you guys make for future webinars. We do listen, and we really do appreciate your feedback on that. So with that, I would especially like to thank our speakers today, Steve and Mike. You guys presented some really great, really useful information. I'd just like to say we had over 130 people on the webinar today. I think that is a record. So yay, way to go. I also posted the upcoming webinars for this 2014-2015 webinar season. I hope that we'll see a lot of you back for those, and we'll really come and participate. This was great today. So thanks, Mike. Thanks, Steve. Thanks to everybody for all your participation. This was wonderful.
See you this evening.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Great job, guys. Really.